Study Session 11 Homicide and Genocide. Introduction. In this study session, focuses will be on homicide and genocide. It will enlighten you on what the two terms are all about. Furthermore, you will examine various forms of homicide as well as various theories which have been postulated to explain the problems. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the concepts of homicide and genocide. 2. Explain their types, causes, and means of preventing them. Homicide. Homicide is a situation where another human being is killed. The act of killing another human being is called homicide. Homicide does not necessarily define an illegal act, but it is sometimes used synonymously with murder. Criminal homicide includes felony murder, capital murder, and manslaughter. This includes voluntary manslaughter, intoxication manslaughter, deaths by dangerous driving, and reckless manslaughter. Many forms of homicide have their own terms based on the person being killed. These include infanticide, killing of an infant; fratricide, killing of one's brother in a military context; killing of a friend, combatant, while others are as follows: sororicide, killing of one's sister; parricide, killing of one's parent; patricide, killing of one's father; matricide, killing of one's mother; matriticide, killing of one's spouse; uxoricide, killing of one's wife; filicide, killing of one's child; regicide, killing of a monarch; genocide, killing of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Homicide may also be non-criminal when conducted with the sanction of the state. The most obvious example is capital punishment, in which the state determines that a person should die. But homicide committed during war are usually not subject to criminal persecution as well. Genocide. Genocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction of an ethnic, racial, religious, or national group. United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide define genocide in Article 2 of the Convention as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Genocide is generally considered one of the worst moral crimes a government, meaning any ruling authority, including that of a guerrilla group, a quasi-state, a Soviet, a terrorist organization, or an occupation authority, can commit against its citizens or those it controls. The major reason for this is what the world learned about the Holocaust: the systematic attempt of German authorities during World War II to kill all and every Jew, no matter where found, or simply to destroy Jews as a group. The murder of between 5 to 6 million Jews became the paradigm case of genocide and underlines the world's origin. As the world also learns about other genocides, there was an international attempt through the United Nations to make genocide an international crime and to bring its perpetrators to justice. Thus, in 1948, it approved and proposed the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide (UHCG), and most recently, states signed into being the International Criminal Court (ICC). As a crime, the UHCG defined genocide as the intention to destroy, in whole or in parts, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, the ICC accepts this definition, further elaborates it, provides broader jurisdiction, and can subject individuals, regardless of status or rank, to persecution. Noteworthy is the fact that the ICC now covers not only genocide but crimes against humanity that include, aside from genocide, government murder, extermination campaigns, enslavement, deportation, torture, rape, sexual slavery, enforced disappearance, and apartheid. Genocide is also a subject of social science and scholarly study, but its legal definition does not easily allow for empirical and historical research. For this reason, the definition of genocide for research purposes has, in essence, been of two types. One is the definition of genocide as the intention to murder people because of their group membership, even if political or economic. A second definition, which may also be called democide, is an intentional government murder of unarmed and helpless people for whatever reason. Psychological explanation of genocide and homicide. The common explanations of genocide and mass killing include things like uniquely violent cultures, groupthink, and mass psychosis and psychopathology. This is not to say that none of these explanations has anything to offer. Rather, they simply don't fit all of the facts as we know them. Neither social nor psychological explanations alone suffice. In their place, Waller offers four interdependent layers of both social and psychological factors. The common explanations of extraordinary human evil, specifically genocide and mass killing, which Waller rejects, includes things like uniquely violent cultures, groupthink, and mass psychosis and psychopathology. This is not to say that none of these explanations have anything to offer. Rather, they simply don't fit all of the facts as we know them. Neither social nor psychological explanations alone suffice. In their place, Waller offers four independent layers of both social and psychological factors. The first layer he calls our ancestral shadow and relates our evolutionary heritage, which has encouraged things like xenophobia, ethnocentrism, and patterns of social dominance. The second has to do with the social forces which mold the perpetrators of evil, cultural beliefs, moral disengagement, and the role of rational self-interest. The third layer deals with the development of a culture of cruelty that allows extraordinary evil to exist, which include socialization, group cohesion, and the measure of role and person. The fourth and final layer involves the social death of the victim, their removal from the moral universe through us-them thinking, dehumanization, and blaming them for what is done to them. We shall now examine the theories that have explained genocide. Several important theories have currently shaped our understanding. Holocaust cases in the explanation of genocide. We shall now have a brief overview of these theories. Please note, this topic is very wide, but this session is just to introduce you to these theories, and I hope that you will explore the resources in the bibliographic section of this study session. Scapegoating theory. Freudian scapegoating theory attempts to explain genocide as an irrational and unconscious displacement of frustration onto a less powerful scapegoat. Scapegoating theory, however, has evolved significantly over the past 50 years, and today, the Freudian explanation has been flawed with many inadequacies by many authors in its attempt to explain the patterns which are seen in genocide. For example, some authors noted that contrary to Freudian theory, the scapegoated group is not likely to be any minority that happens to be vulnerable and helpless, but rather a group that, though it may be vulnerable in actuality, is believed to be powerful, cunning, and dangerous. Scapegoating is more likely to be the result of envious prejudice. This would imply that the process of scapegoating is a conscious cognitive process and not an unconscious psychodynamic process. Envious prejudices are likely to be at their most acute in situations in which majority group members feel that their social status has shifted downwards relative to the status of the minority. A situation likely to create intense feeling of relative deprivation. The resentment that occurs when individuals or groups believe that others' outcomes are unfairly greater than their own. This is known as relative deprivation theory. Another angle to this was proposed by Henry Tajfel, which he called social causation, referring to a human tendency to search for the understanding of complex and unusually distressful large-scale social events. Fritz Hilder, 1958, noted that when we attribute events to the behavior of a person, we typically assume that the other must have the ability to cause the event. In other words, it is argued that for a group to be scapegoated, it must first be perceived as having the ability to cause widespread problems. There also must be the perception that the targeted group has the intent to cause the frustrating event. Another flaw of the Freudian scapegoating theory is that increasing ideological commitment can maintain aggression against a scapegoat even if the frustration that initially generated attraction to the ideology disappears. If Freudian displacement is truly occurring, then once the frustration is released or the stressor removed, then the violence should end. Billing 1976 writes, "It is too fanciful to imagine that the Germans were kept in an increasing state of emotional arousal for 15 years, and at the end of this time, simultaneously millions happened to rid themselves of this tension in an identical manner." In other words, if displacement theory is correct, i.e., that the Germans were frustrated with the power of the Allies after World War One, and therefore displaced their frustrations into the Jews. Why, once Germany was rearmed and powerful and began to attack the true sources of frustration, did the persecution of Jews escalate rather than diminish? Alport, 1954, modified the scapegoating theory with the concept of complementary projection. Unfavorable stereotypes of a targeted group are rationalizations that are caused by, rather than causes, aggressive impulses towards the group. In other words, the undesirable traits are attributed to the group to justify aggression. This is similar to the concept of derogation of the victim, in which the perpetrator justifies his actions by claiming that it is a just response to the actions of the victim. Lerner calls this the just world hypothesis. This theory also allows us to maintain a sense of security, recognizing that since I do not believe the way the victim does, I am therefore safe from violence. Lastly, as early as 1948, Zawadzki noted that scapegoat theory is inadequate in predicting which minority group will be chosen as a target and in accounting for differences in the intensity of dislike. Why is it that so many separate individuals' psychic conflicts were resolved by choosing the same target? It appears that a more conscious process is necessary, that is, an ideology as a mediating force in order to result to genocide. The continuum of destruction. Erwin Staub argues that genocide and mass killing do not directly arise from difficult life conditions and their psychological effects. There is a progression along a continuum of destruction. People learn and change by participation as a consequence of their own action. Small, seemingly insignificant acts can involve a person with a destructive system. For example, accepting benefits provided by the system or even using a required greeting, such as "Hail Hitler," initiates acts that cause limited harm, results in psychological changes that make further destruction actions possible. Victims are further devalued. For example, just world thinking may lead people to believe that suffering is deserved. Perpetrators change and become more able and willing to act against victims. In the end, people develop powerful commitment to genocide or to an ideology that supports it. Stapp argues that the necessary societal preconditions, in which he calls ideologies of antagonism, which are the outcomes of a long history of hostility and mutual violence. Such ideologies are worldviews in which another group is perceived as an implacable enemy bent on one's destruction. While a history of hostility and violence can create a realistic fear of the other, usually the extremely negative view of the other is resistant to change. The group's identity has come to include enmity towards the other. Another simple factor is the false consensus belief. When people falsely believe that their attitude or beliefs are shared by a majority of other people. According to Albert Bandura, such consensus beliefs provide social justification for moral disengagement, thus serving as precursors to collective violence and facilitating the transition of the eventual perpetrator. He takes his theory a bit further by discussing the role of all players, victims, perpetrators, helpers, and bystanders. He has argued that healing victimized group is essential to reduce the likelihood that they become perpetrators. His theory is often referred to as socio-cultural motivation theory because it focuses on a multiplicity of interacting influences which result in intense group violence. The theory focuses on changes within both the individual and the group, the role of bystanders, and how factors interact. Disposition, situation, or both? Leonard Newman argues that the dichotomy of situation versus disposition is an artificial one. Situations do not only interact with dispositional factors to affect behavior, they shape and change those dispositions. People do not just react to a situation, they also affect and shape the situation. And situations themselves do not even objectively exist, but need to be cognitively constructed by the people they then go on to affect. Ross and Nisbet, 1991, discussed the power of the situation through the principle of construal. The impact of any objective stimulus situation depends upon the personal and subjective meaning that the actor attaches to that situation. To predict the behavior of a given person successfully, we must be able to appreciate the actor's construal of the situation, that is, the manner in which the person understands the situation as a whole. Cognitive dissonance has been shown to play a significant role in how a person responds to a given situation. When people are led to engage in behaviors that violate their normal standards, they will feel anxiety and stress, which Festinger referred to as cognitive dissonance. As a means of alleviating this stress, they will be motivated to change their attitudes and beliefs to reduce the discrepancy between their behavior and their cognitions. Bandura 1999 extends the theory of cognitive dissonance by discussing gradualistic moral disengagement. According to his theory, investing harmful conduct with high moral purpose not only eliminates self-censure, but it engages self-approval in the service of the destructive exploits. In order to do this, we recontextualize behavior. For example, we are not killing innocent people, but building a better world for my family. Group norming theories. Matza, 1996, carried out a very illustrative study of juvenile delinquents. Miller and Prentice summarized the conclusion. Each of the youths in the gang were privately very uncomfortable with his own behavior, but because the youths were unwilling to express their reservations publicly, they each appeared to the other as fully committed to and comfortable with the group's delinquency. This is a system of shared misunderstanding which led to a level of antisocial behavior and no individual member fully embraced. This study illustrates how people's collective efforts to blend in and conform to a norm can actually reinforce the power of an illusory norm that actually has no counterpart at the level of individuals within the group. Group theory is the foundation of much of social psychology. Many of the behaviors which we manifest as individuals are also the behaviors that we see in groups. Like individuals, groups have self-esteem, anxiety, goal-driven behavior, inter alia. In addition, Pettigrew 1979 argued that one's group membership is so important that we attempt to rationalize not only our own behavior but also the behavior of groups we identify with. Turner 1985 proposed self-categorization theory, that is, the group in which we are members form the basis for the categorizations that we use to identify others and ourselves. In addition, members try to position themselves close to the most prototypical member of the group. Since the most prototypical member tends to be the most different from the outgroup, this leads to more extreme positions or attitudes by the in-group when the inter-group context is made salient. Moscovici 1984 refers to generally shared beliefs of a group as social representation. They form the basis of a social aggregate's shared reality and are often used to justify or substantiate other related beliefs or opinions. The perceived validity of a belief is increased simply by communicating it to someone. A person's available or salient knowledge, regardless of its perceived validity, affects his or her processing of information. For example, all Nigerians know the basic elements of a Wazobia stereotype, regardless of whether they believe in it. Hence, Nigerians will interpret relevant situations through the social representation of that information. Hence, framing one's preferred position or solution in terms of a shared belief system or social representation can be a quite powerful influence, even when the majority disagrees with your position initially. It is very difficult for a minority opinion to sway the majority of a society. Moscovici has found that the most important factor is the consistency of the argument. We can see this in the way that Hitler's Nazi party gained popularity. They kept saying the same thing for almost 20 years. When the social situation changed and fit more in line with their consistent message, people were more apt to accept what they were saying. They had never wavered, and now they were seen as possibly being correct. But Latane has argued that the issue of majority versus minority opinion is much more complex than Moscovici proposes. Latane's dynamic social impact theory argues that the impact that others have on a person's attitude, belief and behaviors is determined by the strengths, which includes status and experience, immediacy, which includes closeness, either physically or socially, and number of influence sources. Over time, beliefs initially held by a majority of the people tend to spread and become more prominent throughout the aggregate. However, belief clusters also form, thus preventing the majority opinion from totally eradicating the minority. Shared belief structures evolve naturally, and people end up believing many of the same things as their neighbors. This is not a linear process, but a constantly evolving set of understandings. Part of the determination of belief has to do with the availability of information to the group. In a study by Strasser and Titus 1985, information about political candidates was distributed among group members, such that some items were shared by all three members while other items were given to only one member. When the group members were represented with all the information, one of the candidates appeared clearly superior to the other two. The researchers described the positive information about the superior candidate such that most of it was unshared, given to only one member, while the positive information about the other candidates were shared among all the members. They found that unshared information was much less likely than shared information to be brought up during discussion. Consequently, few groups choose the superior candidate. In other words, when a group comes together to make a decision or discuss an issue, information that is already shared by everyone in the group dominates the discussion and tends to guide the group towards decisions consistent with the shared information. Kamida argues that cognitively central group members, members who share more information with other members, are more influential. Sharing more information with other group members conveys the perception of expertise to the other members. Study session summary. In this study session, we have focused on homicide and genocide. We defined the two concepts clearly, examined various forms of homicide. Furthermore, we examined different psychological theories to explain the phenomena. End of study session 11. Thanks for listening.